Hi, this is Kathy L. Murphy, and I'm reporting from my little cabin in the woods, Murphy's Law, here in East Texas. And today we have a very special guest for our online International Pulpwood Queens and Timber Guys Book Club Reading Nation. We have Fernandina Beach, Florida author Joe Palmer. And Joe is here to talk about his book, which is one of our selections, A Mariner's Tale. It's a novel, and it's one that is a real page turner. So we're going to begin with, hi, Joe, how are you doing?
Hey, Kathy, I'm doing great. How are you? Thank you for having me here, and thank you for picking my book. It's an honor.
Well,
Thank you so much.
This afternoon I went kind of back through it because it's been a while since I read it. And the thing that struck me as I went back through kind of hitting the highlights of your book was men just write differently than women. And I just, in fact, the whole time I was rereading it, I was reminded of Pat Conroy because he was one of my favorite authors.
Oh, God.
And I could see the influence. I could see the influence of the story. But why don't you tell our audience here today, first of all, about how this book got started and why you decided to write this novel?
Okay. So in 2012, after I retired, my wife and I are sailors. We had this little small sailboat, and we've been talking about getting something bigger, but we didn't want to spend a lot of money. And so I'm down at the marina one day, tinkering around on the other boat, and the owner comes over and goes, "Hey, there's an abandoned 28-foot sailboat on Sea Dock down there. Why don't you have a look at it?" And I said, okay. So I went down, I looked, it was a mess. It was a mess. But it had this, it was a Cal 28 that were made in California back in the 60s and the 70s. And this one had a flush deck on it, so you didn't have to climb up over things. And I thought, Pam will like that. That's cool to get out on so you can catch some rays. So I called her down. She came and looked at it, and she goes, "Oh my God, let's get it." So I picked it up for the delinquent $1,500 slip fee. And the guy had just handed in the title. And so I set about restoring it. Pam and I did a laborious process that began in 2012. And in August of 2015, I was doing some work on it. And there's this old guy. He, the character Merkel in my book is kind of sort of based on this guy's looks. His name is Gene. Gene had taught me how to lay up fiberglass, to roll and tip a paint job, to work wood. I'm not good at those kinds of things, so I had to learn. So I was working on this really stubborn patch of fiberglass one afternoon in the mid-August sun, which you're not supposed to do. And it kept messing up and messing up and messing up. And finally, I just threw my hands up and I said, "The hell with it." And I sat down and I pulled out a bottle of Gatorade out of my cooler, and I was drinking my Gatorade, and I was listening to a song on my little stereo. The recording artist's name is Mark Knopfler. Many of you may remember him as the lead singer for Dire Straits. Mark Knopfler, his music is just poetry. And so he had written this song called "In the Sky." And it's about an old man who sailed all over the world on a boat that he made. And now he's deaf and he's standing by a fire where all these musicians are playing, but he can't hear anything. And there's this beautiful line that says, "A vagabond wind whispers over the bay, the sounds and the laughter were carried away." And I thought, wow. And in my mind, I just sort of had a snapshot. And I went home and I thought, there's a book in that song. And I went home that night, and when we were eating supper, I told my wife, I have an idea for a novel. In fact, I might even call it Vagabond Wind, which was the original title. But so that's how it started. That night, I went down into my office here and I started writing. I had no idea where I was going with it. I had sort of a vague idea in mind. But so it was a lot like learning how to sail for me. When you sail, the wind does not flow in a straight line. Most people think it's like fingers. And so you can't always go straight. You know, you can sometimes, but quite often you're tacking port, you're tacking starboard. And so that's what I found myself doing, was kind of tacking starboard and port, looking for waypoints along the way. And eventually I figured out where I wanted to go with this story. So,
Well, it's a wonderful tale, and it reminds me. I don't know if you've ever read any Gary Paulson, but Gary Paulson is probably one of the most prolific children's book uh, authors. Won every award you can win, but he's a sailor, and
uh,
he has sailed
Gary
around the-
Paulson,
Gary Paulson.
I've got a book on piloting by Gary Paulson. He's written sailing books.
I didn't know he'd written sail. He's got a new
Yeah.
autobiography that's coming out this coming year, but I've read everything. He wrote Hatchet, and then the
Mhm.
sequel to Hatchet, and all these, and they're all wonderful books about surviving in nature and in the
Yeah.
elements. And he's fascinating. But he last time I know that he went out, he was having heart trouble, so they put him on a special diet, and the whole time he was on the ship, he lived on chili, cans of chili. And I thought,
Well, that'll work.
I'd get awful tired of that. But it was a fascinating story, and I love the story of the young man and working with kids at the juvenile detention center. It's amazing if you get one person who really takes an interest, because most of the
Mhm.
problems in the world is comes from absent parenting,
Mhm.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
if we want the world to be a better place, we got to take better care of our kids, because
Yeah.
that's what happens if somebody isn't, properly taken care of. They act out in weird ways. So I
Yeah.
love the story, and then of course of Margie and everything.
She wasn't supposed to be in the story.
Oh,
He
really?
was sort of a transitional character from one chapter to the next. And I tell people say, how do you know what to write? And I say, I just do what the voices in my head tell me to do. Margie's character was so strong that she was literally like grabbing me by the shirt, going, I got to be in this story. And I started thinking about it, and I thought, I do need the feminine influence here. Because you got to be able to write books for women, because 80% of the fiction reading market these days are women. And so I decided I needed the female touch, and I needed her sort of, in your face extrovert personality as a counterbalance to this brooding reticence of Merkel. So I actually had to go back later and do a backstory and kind of fill her into and she's like, I don't know, she ranks right up there with one of my favorite characters.
Most authors that I've interviewed through the 20 years, almost every one of them say, people say, do you have an outline? Do you have a story? Do you write the beginning first, the end first? And most every author I talk to says, I always start out with that idea, but then the voices take over.
That's
And
right.
I really do believe that is really what happens with these characters. They become so real to us, and I think that's what makes a story so much better. They're so believable. And in fact, are they still with you now, Joe? The characters.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, they still are. I mean, I can still see every one of them.
There we go. I need a little comb on it. But
I
anyway,
mean, even that guy, the bait fisherman, Bucky Howard, that cadged the cigar off the judge. I mean, I still see that guy. Now I see people like him around the marshes and the backwater crabbing and shrimping all the time. So, but yeah, these characters they do become real to you.
and I think it's important that we read from both the male and female voice, because men have a different way of storytelling. And, we've been doing a lot of books written by women, and I'd almost forgotten. I like to include books like Billy Flynn's Long Halftime Walk was one of them. I like to see the guys' perspectives. Gates of the Alamo. I mean, and I'm a big fan of McMurtry and
Oh God, yeah.
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 And they don't always have that many women characters in them, and it's okay. Lonesome Dove was, you know,
Lonesome Dove.
oh my gosh, yeah.
Oh boy, yeah.
Hey, I hate to interrupt. But Kathy, I know I was late, so I kind of messed you up. But would you make me an administrator so I can share? I'm sharing the stuff, but it's not going because I'm not.
Sorry, I should have done it. Okay.
Well, I was late. It's my fault. I missed.
You're a co-host now.
So do you think I did okay with capturing that female essence and presence?
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know how I did that, and I can't take credit for that. I have to give credit to
I know women like her. Yeah. I thought it was great.
I have to give credit to Judy Kurtz Goldman for that. Judy was my line editor. And when I was at the Pat Conroy Literary Festival, I think it was maybe the third one. And I'd gone as far as I could go with this on my own. And so here comes Harley. I called Stephanie after the session was over, and I said, I need an editor now. I need a projects editor.
Good for you.
I got a really good name for you if you can get her. And so she gave me the contact information. I came straight home and called her. As luck would have it, somebody that she was supposed to be doing next had backed out. So she had an opening. She put me right in it. And one of the things that she told me, she did a super job. She made me feel really good, some of the things that she said. But she told me I needed to go back and work on Margie. I needed to get a voice. And she said, so how do you do that? Well, sit down and listen to your wife and her girlfriends talking. Go downtown and just sit on a park bench and eavesdrop. Listen to what people are saying. Listen to what kind of voices they use. Write little notes down. What does this lady do while she's talking? Does she push her hair out of her eyes? Does she do this? Does she do that? So that's what I did for like a month. I did that for like a month, and I was constantly bugging my wife. Does this sound right? Does this sound right? And so it took a lot of work to do that, though. It really did. And I feel good that other women are telling me that I got the female part right.
Did you read the conversation out loud? Because that's what I do.
Yeah.
I read out loud. I can always tell immediately if something doesn't sound true, or if it's just something a little, off about it.
Yeah.
And then getting a good editor is important. I know that in my process, I have my librarian friends reading it, my English major friends reading it, and then, went on to, my editor, which at Grand Central, Amy Einhorn. And I tell you, and then my agent, Marley Rusoff, she was instrumental in, well, she gave me the title for my book, and I know you have a relationship with her too.
She helped me get the title for mine. It was really funny.
Great at that, isn't she? Yeah, she's good.
We had settled on Vagabond Wind. It was a cool title. It's that whole thing, about the hurricane and the Vagabond Wind, just like an integral part of the story. And I'm lying in bed one night, and I get a text from Marley, and all it said was, most authors have a few ideas of mine about alternate titles. Did you happen to have one for yours? And so I texted back and said, well, no, not really. And she goes, well, I'm going to call you tomorrow. So she called me, and she said, I love this title. It's very catchy. And she goes, but here's the thing. Vagabond Wind is only one part of that story. It's not the whole story. She said, what's the story about? What is the story about? And I said, well, it's about this old sailor who becomes a mentor to this boy. And she goes, yes. So let's find a title that captures that. I said, okay, what do you want me to do? And she goes, write down like 20 titles and pick one of your choosing, but don't tell me which one it is. And I said, okay. So when I put them all down, I had The Mariner's Tale, and then I had A Mariner's Tale. I looked at it and I thought, ooh, I like that. So I sent them to her, and she texted me back the next day and said, A Mariner's Tale is the title of your story.
Yeah.
So we went with
Pretty
that.
sharp.
Yeah, yeah. She's awesome.
She came up with my title because I had no idea what to call my book, and so and I love her for that. But she's pretty savvy when it comes to those catchy titles. But this
She's
is
insightful, yeah.
yeah, she's wonderful. And so you've written this book, but the way it you're caught up in the story. It's a real page turner. But when you get to the very end of the book, I'm not going to do any spoilers, but I have to tell you, I love the ending
Oh,
because
thank you.
So many times in books that I don't choose, they're so pat and they're just very well done to death, and or they leave you in such a state of anxiety that you just want to go, oh, I want to kill this person. But your book had the perfect ending. Hi, Eileen, welcome. It had the perfect ending, and I don't know, was that the first ending that you had, or did you work on that for a long time?
No, that was like the 33rd ending. The first ending was, oh my God, the Claire, you're going to get this treacly, as the Irish would say, treacly. It was like laying on your back and just drinking cane syrup right out of the bottle. It was just too sweet. And it was over the top emotional, and oh my God, the hugs and the tears and the crying on the shoulder. And I got done with it, and I looked at it and I said, Jesus H. Christ, I am not putting my name on something that sucks that bad. And I went back and I rewrote it and I rewrote it and I rewrote it, and I kept toning it down and toning it down. And I decided, I don't want it to have a perfect ending. I hate perfect endings. I don't want something that's just so pat you can see it coming a mile away.
Yeah.
I wanted there to be something a little bit enigmatic about it, I guess is the word I'm looking for. And so that's why I chose to end it the way I did. I've had several people say, well, why didn't we just go on through the door with them? And I said, because that was going to be a private moment. I want, you can imagine that. It's we know what's going to happen. Well, we don't get to see her. Well, sure you do. And the other thing is, and I'm probably making a little spoiler here, he didn't know until the bitter end that he was even going to find her.
Anything more, because there's a lot of people that are still reading it. But
oh, okay.
But I want to talk a little bit about this week. You've been doing our daily blogs as our guest host for Breathless Bubbles and Books, and you brought up a hot topic and a hot button for me, which is Southern writing. What makes Southern writing so, I'm totally addicted to Southern writing. It's the first type of book I turn to. And now I've literally discovered that just this past year that Southerners aren't always the best writers, because I'm finding out now that I fell down this Bollywood rabbit hole that let me tell you, those Indian storytellers, they shock me every time. I have read so many books, I've watched so many films, I can always kind of see where it's going. I'm going to tell you, the films that I'm seeing from Pakistan and India, whether it's in the northern or southern part, or even the Middle East, they have a different take on things, and it's opened my eyes to what else don't I know. But back to the Southern thing, I think I moved this way because I come from a family that came from the South, worked their way up to Kansas, and my grandmother, my great grandmother, they were storytellers. And then we have this Scot-Irish past, and we also, I was told we had this Native American Indian past. I wasn't even sure if we maybe had African American, all these different cultures that come together in this Southern melting pot. I've found out since then, I'm hardly Scot-Irish at all. And there is no Native American Indian in my blood. I'm European. I've never been so shocked in my life. And absolutely no African American. I was so disappointed because I love the storytelling of all these different cultures. So
Mhm.
this is important because my favorite writers have always been the Southern ones, the Pat Conroys, the Cassandra Kings, the Ellen Gilchrist, the Mark Childress, the Michael Morris. I can just go on all the, the authors that are here today. Well, maybe not Eileen, she's up in New Jersey, but I know that Claire comes from Memphis. So yes.
Mhm.
So anyway, what made you choose that direction when you were doing that blog on that particular thing? Is that something that is just, a part of your being, or?
It's something I've been thinking about for a long time. I've told some other people in the past, we'd be having these conversations about Southern writers, and I've always said all along, there's something unique about Southern fiction. And I started delving into it. And my pet theory has always been that a lot of it came out of the Celtic influence, the storytelling. And so I started doing some research in that, and lo and behold, I found out that it's true. In fact, there's one scholar, and I can't remember his name now, who did a paper and said that if it weren't for the Celtic influence, there just wouldn't be Southern fiction, because of the Irish people who came, and the Scots-Irish people settled in, many of them settled in Appalachia and North Georgia, the mountain areas, and they came from tribal people who told stories. And they went back a long time. And then, of course, our Native American people, and I really picked out the Cherokee, the Creek, and the Seminole because they're in this part of the world. I mean, I have friends who are Native Americans, and I could sit around all night and listen to them tell stories. Oh my God. And African Americans, the slaves,
Same way.
the same for them. And I mean, they brought this, they were they were dislanded. They were taken away from the land, just like the Irish and the Scots were. The plantation of Ireland, the English people went onto the land and said, "You're out of here." They took all their land. So they were dispossessed people, just like the Scots Irish, the Indians, they were dispossessed people. The African Americans were, and of course, there's a lot of spiritualism in their storytelling. And they had to tell stories because African Americans, it was illegal to teach an African American to read or write. They'd get beaten for it and you'd get fined for it. So I think the common thing is that because the illiteracy rate was very high, that all of this storytelling just sort of started commingling together and began, it's like rolling a ball of wax along on the floor. It just sort of picks up everything that goes along. And the stories get passed along from family to family and generation to generation. And I think it's like I put in my post today, it becomes at some point like playing post office. Y'all played post office before. You tell somebody, you whisper in somebody's ear, and there's 25 other people.
Oh, yeah.
And by the time it gets to the end, it's nothing like. It's always a much better story than what the original. And I think, so that's what's happened. And in the 1920s and the 1930s was the Southern Renaissance. And that's really when Southern fiction got beyond the whole lost cause thing. Up until that, Southern fiction was basically about the lost cause. And it wasn't until along come the Renaissance and Faulkner and Woolf, Margaret Mitchell, Erskine Caldwell. There was an African-American gentleman by the name of George Chestnut. It was only at that point that they began able to step back and look critically at the South and to be able to tell stories that weren't just remakes of the lost cause. And of course, it just progressed from there on, to the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And then, of course, the new Southern writers like Conroy Pat Conroy, he sowed kudzu in the South. I mean, he did. I mean, the man planted a seed that it just covered the South. And I don't even know if he thought he was doing it or not. But so, yeah, I think that's where I just really get interested in that for a long time. And I decided to write a blog. I'd seen something on television the day before about our Southern pride. And here they were waving the flag again. And I'm like, that's not what our Southern pride is. Our Southern pride is in this rich literary scene in this part of the world. Talk about Southern pride. These are the people that ought to have their words etched and granted and laid as the cornerstone in schools and library. That's our Southern pride, not this other stuff. So I did the blog, and Sherry read it, and she called me and she goes, oh, because we were getting ready to do a book trailer. And she called me the next day and she said, let's put the book trailer on hold. I have an idea. So we took this idea and we're putting together a video on this. And it'll go on YouTube. And of course, it'll go on my site. Jonathan Hout is going to sit in with us. We were supposed to have a dry run yesterday, but Jonathan's hot water heater burst.
Oh, no.
I know, poor guy. I've been there. So we're having to postpone. So we're going to do a dry run, and then sometime in June, we're going to put all this together, and we're going to sit in. I wish we could all be in one place, but we can't. So the three of us are going to get together, and when I get to the part about, the new generation, the Conroy-esque writers and stuff, I'm just going to hand it off to Jonathan and let Jonathan talk about it. So does that answer your question?
Sure.
I've been
It's always interesting. And now we've even got more new writers coming into the picture. When you've been doing this 20 years, you see cycles of different types of writing. You read as much as I do, and I get a lot of books, but I would say 9 out of every 10 books I get is a story that's been already told, and they don't know it. They don't know the story's been told so many times because they may have not be old enough to read as many books as I have, But I do see trends and cycles and different things on how it's going. And now with writers like Mandy Haynes and
oh God, yeah.
and Robert Waltney and Claire Fullerton, all these wonderful Southern stories. But I think that even though the Southern stories are prominent, there's still some really amazing storytelling that's coming from other parts of the country and world too. And that's why I'm trying to focus now on giving everybody a fair shake. Because even though the Pulpwood Queen started in the, here in Texas, and the part I live in Texas is really more Southern than Texan. People always come here and go, where can I get some cowboy hat and boots? And I go, you're more likely to see Spanish moss and alligator, y'all, where I live, because that picture you put up on Facebook of the bayou, that looks just like here. I mean, Caddo Lake has had so many movies filmed there because it looks just like that. But I think that now, and so that's what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to find those stories that are representative of how this has created a ripple effect across the country, and try to bring us all back in through the storytelling of all these different people. But it is a fascinating topic, and it's also a little bit controversial too, because some Southern authors don't want to be labeled Southern. They just want to be labeled author. Female authors don't want to be labeled female authors. Some of them just want to be labeled author. And I'm one of these people. I hate to be labeled, because I think then that puts you in a box. That it's interesting when you start reading out further in the world, that I'm seeing more connections now than I've ever seen before. So I think when we, it's a very important talk. I hear it a lot when I go to the Tennessee Williams Literary Festival and other festivals about what makes a Southern author Southern, what makes a a northern author, northern, or we've got, so it's very interesting, and I think opening the conversation is how we all learn. So
Yeah.
hopefully we'll all learn from this. But now this book, you have set it up where I almost think you could write another book. This was a springboard into another book. Is that something you've thought about? Not
No.
really? No?
Oh, I've thought about it, and the answer is no, I'm not going to. I mean, yeah, I guess I could, but I really don't want to.
I agree.
I'm not a big fan of sequels.
Yeah.
I'm just not. And I think most everyone I've ever read was sort of underwhelming, except maybe Game of Thrones. And I don't know that those even qualify as sequels. They're all just sort of mingled. But no, I want to move on, and I'm working on my next one now.
Oh, good.
And it's a completely different kind of a story. I mean, it's still set in the South, but instead of being told narratively like this, I'm telling it first person, which is really cool to me because it feels more like storytelling. And I go back to my own childhood in this one up in South Georgia. And it's about a group of 5 misfit kids who sort of cast in their lot together and take a blood oath never to be apart from each other when they're 12 years old. And of course, fate has other ideas. And it's sort of what happens to them as you follow them. And, there's the tragedies that befall them and the piecing of things together. It's called Of Locusts and Wild Honey.
Oh, wow.
And that's the cicada plays a big role in this story. We called them locusts when I was a kid. You heard the things out of the trees. What are those? Those are locusts. We didn't know what a cicada was.
Cicada, cicada, we call them
cicada, cicada. And of course, the title, of Locusts and Wild Honey comes from the Gospel of Matthew about John going out into the wilderness. So that's sort of a theme in this whole thing. But yeah, it's a completely different kind of a story. And I think it's better than A Mariner's Tale. I mean, I know it's a different kind of story, but the couple of people that I've read what I've got, I'm like 15 chapters into it. And the consensus has been so far that it's better than A Mariner's Tale. And my wife tells me that, and she's never wrong when she tells me. She'll listen to stuff I'm reading, and sometimes all she'll do is just sort of put her finger down her throat, and I know. I guess I don't need to write that sentence again. But
well,
no.
I've not read what you've written, but those are some of the stories that you told me when I first met you.
That's right.
When we were drinking coffee, because when you said the title, which wasn't a title yet, you were just, we were both drinking our coffee and we stopped and looked at each other and we're like, you need to write that.
I wrote a newspaper column. I had a newspaper column here for many years called Cup of Joe. And I first started out like every other columnist starts out, throwing rocks at City Hall. And a couple of years into it, I thought, this is boring. Anybody can do this. So what I decided to do was just to tell stories. And so I would take things that happened and embellish them, or things that didn't happen that I wanted to happen, and make stories out of that. And I did write a column called Of Locusts and Wild Honey. And it was about my fascination, they're going to start any day now. They're just hatching out. So I'm waiting for that sound when I can just throw my windows in my office wide open and listen to them. But I'd written this column about them. And I'd mentioned a couple of, these kids, but I never really went any further into it. But I've been talking about it. When I started writing this, Pam goes, "You've been telling me this story 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even think about it. And I said, have I? And she said, yeah. And I wanted to write it a couple of years ago, but I didn't quite not know how to go about it because my childhood was not a happy childhood. I think my daddy and Pat Conroy's daddy might have been related because he was a Marine too. And so I did really want to revisit that. But I did want to tell the story. And so I was in the hospital when I had open heart surgery 2 summers ago. And the nurses came around at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon and gave me my pain medicine. And I was just sort of laying there daydreaming and started thinking about this story. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. And I guess it was because I was just sort of allowing myself to just sort of free form. And I went home from the hospital and wrote a 25-page synopsis. And then I guess it was in November or December I started writing it. So anyway, I'm off topic here now.
No, you're right on topic because everybody always wants to know, what are you working on next? So
well, that's it, and I'm loving it. Does anybody know who Amelia Wall Warner is? She does a lot of book reviews. She reviewed A Mariner's Tale, and she was also on Facebook through a mutual friend at the Pat Conroy Literary Center, and she's a huge donor to them. And she and I actually talked. I Facebook messaged her and thanked her for the really nice review she gave me. And we just started talking about books, and she asked me what else I was working on, and I told her. And she asked me if I'd share some of it with her, and I said, sure, I got to do that eventually with somebody anyway, and who better to do it with than somebody who really reviews a lot of books. And she's like the first person who told me that it's better than the one I'm working on now. So I just got to keep at it. I do have to back up though. When I wrote that last chapter that we were talking about earlier, the one thing I wanted to make sure I got right was that the Irish part needed to be right. I mean, I went there and spent right at a week prepping and gathering information and going to these places that are mentioned. But then when I wrote it, I wanted to make sure that it didn't sound stilted. And so I'd met a lot of friends there over the years. And so I took that last chapter and gave it to 5 of them and just told them to have at it. Just go through there and tear it up. If you don't think this sounds right, tell me. If you don't think, tell me what sounds right, tell me what doesn't sound right. And I got a whole lot of help from them. And after that last go around with them, I thought, that's it. That works. And
that's smart. That's really smart. I remember years ago, Kimberly Willis Holt, who's a National Book Award winner, she had written a book. This was her first book. It was called My Louisiana Sky. And it was set in East Texas. And she sent it to me and she said, would you look this over? And does this dialogue sound like East Texas? And the first thing I noticed right off the back, she goes, and I asked my grandma to pass me the Smucker's strawberry jam. And I go, no, not in East Texas. No. You'd be Blackburn's strawberry, which is made in Jefferson, Texas. And she did, she changed it. But there's a lot of things, people say things in threes in East Texas. They go, that was good. Or if you listen to Matthew McConaughey, he does it. He'll say things 3 times. I don't know what it is. And there's words like staub and Piro and different, terms that have to do with the water and so it's helpful when you go to the source. If you can go there, that's even better. But if you can also talk to people who, are actually Irish, when you're talking about the Irish, that's great. That's really good. So
yeah, because, people, I mean, I do the same thing. If I read a book written by somebody who's not a Southerner, for example, and they're writing about something in the South, it better be right. If you're going to talk about something about alligators, be accurate about it. Don't just throw something there that you heard from
We're
your
talking
brother.
about the crocodile.
Yeah, don't call him a crocodile.
Because
Yeah.
there's a big difference between a crocodile and an alligator.
And don't call a coon a possum or a possum a coon. I mean,
Yeah.
make it right. And it needs to sound authentic too. I mean, the conversations need to sound like actual conversations. And I was really, really lucky in the regard on that particular chapter when I wanted to go down and see the harbor at Dunleary, out on the coast of Dublin. And so I went down to O'Connell Station and caught the train down to Dunleary. And it's about a 25, 30-minute ride. And this old Irish gentleman came and sat down next to me. And of course, the first time I said a word, of course, I was a Yank. He wanted to talk. They love Southern accents anyway. And we started talking, and he had the greatest accent. I loved his accent, and I loved his mannerisms. And he was so calm, and he kept smoking his pipe, and then he'd put it out, then he'd light it again. And he was very humorous. The train pulled up in front of the marina office, and there sat in a planter across in front of the marina office 5 what appeared to be cabbage palm trees. And I'm standing there looking at them, and the guy goes, "What's the matter?" And I said, "Are those palm trees?" And he looks at me and he goes, "Well, of course they're feckin' palm trees." And I said, "I thought maybe they were fake palm trees." "No, why would they be fake?" And I said, "Because palm trees grow in the South." Well, come to find out, the Gulf Stream current, because the coast along the climate along the coast right there is actually fairly temperate. It doesn't get a whole lot colder right through there than it does like in South Carolina in the wintertime. It just rains a lot more. But this guy had such a cool voice that I gave that to the old marina guy. I gave him that voice.
That's cool.
Because I just fell in love with the guy's voice.
We years ago, I interviewed Frank Delaney, who is an Irish storyteller. He's written all these books, and he ran the BBC's book club for like 30 years. It was very intimidating, but he was so charming and so lovely. By the time I was done with the interview, I was madly in love with him because of that voice. I mean, those voices, oh my gosh, there's something sexy about an Irish voice, So I really loved him, and I love his books. But we have a lot of Pulpwood Queens who, authors who go to Ireland and Wales and Scotland and base books there. So we keep it going. But this next book, we look forward to it. It's a great title. I'm going to open it up now for conversation. If anybody wants to ask you questions about your
Sure.
writing process or anything about your book,
Okay.
right ahead. Who wants to be first?
Well, I just want to say that I read A Mariner's Tale, the first one, before it was even finished.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about it a lot. Just how much work you put into it, because you had that first draft I read, and it was good, but you weren't ready yet. But it was really good. And then your second version of it, you added a whole different scene in there, a whole different thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, that should go somewhere else. And I was a little bit worried because before I had a chance to talk to you, somebody else had read it, I think, by that point, and you'd taken it out. And I was so glad because I loved the way it turned out. But I mean, anybody listening, I mean, Joe worked on this novel. He put a lot of work into it. And you can tell when you read it.
I finished the first draft on the first anniversary of Pat Conroy's death. And it was pure serendipity. I didn't even realize it. And I logged off my computer and I was looking at something, I was looking at some news, and damn if there wasn't an article about Pat Conroy, and it was the first anniversary of his death, and I went, oh my God, wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did put a couple of things in that I later took out.
I mean, and it's like, I'm so proud of you for just how much work you put into it, because, you know, that's hard, because you had already done so much work, and then you put something else in there that it's not that it wasn't, it's not that it wasn't good. It just didn't fit in that. It didn't fit in A Mariner's Tale.
It didn't. And if the first draft had been published, it would have been like 170,000 words. I mean, it would have been this thick.
And then I read, it was still Vagabond Wind. Like, that's what I think of when I think of it. It's so funny to see A Mariner's Tale, but it's perfect. That's a perfect title for it.
Yeah, because that's what it is. It's this old sailor's tale.
And the color green, how the color green, you wove that through. I just thought that was beautiful.
That was neat.
And you know, I didn't do that intentionally till about 2/3 of the way in. I just love green, and the Spartina grass, when it starts turning green, it's just, oh my God, I could just sit there and look at it all day long. And the wind will blow across it, and it'll go back and forth, and it'll be this color green, and then it'll be that color, and then it'll be sort of emerald color, and then a cloud will pass over, and it'll be sort of the color of an avocado, and it just captivates me. And so I just started putting that in. And one of my beta readers, he's like very visual. She goes, "Are you doing this intentionally?" And I said, "What?" She said, "With the green stuff here." And I said, "No." And she goes, "Dude, this is like organic metaphor." And I said, "Well, I've never heard that term before."
Me either. That's great.
And so when I realized what I was doing, but you know, I thought, and here's the deal: I was raised Catholic, and we had to study the Baltimore Catechism and the virtues: faith, hope, and charity. The color for charity, for hope, is green. It's always been a green color. And so at that point, I thought, well, this is about hope, so let me work this. And then, of course, I remembered that chapter and or that verse in Jules Verne's Rayon Vert about the true green of hope. You know, if there was an artist, if there was a color that any artist could capture, that it would be the true green of hope. And I thought, wow, I like that. So I put that in. And of course, I
think that's. Oh, sorry.
It with green.
But I think that's why it's so good, is because you didn't even know you were doing it. How you say how the voices you just write. I mean, and that's what authors have to do. You have to let your characters guide you. Mm-hmm. You know, you really, to have a story that reads well, and that's just, you have to let the characters tell you. And I think that's, like you said, you didn't even realize that was happening.
No, I really didn't until like literally almost 2/3 of the way through, because I just love green. You know, I love the marshes. I just love green. It's my favorite color. And
it also means the beginning of things, like, for instance, the
right.
greening of May.
That's right. Yeah. It's the
initial stage.
That's right. It's birth. Yeah. And it's renewal and regeneration.
Yes.
It's all those things. There's a Catholic college in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I think it's called Marymount. I'm not sure. And there's a cathedral there. And in the dome of the basilica of this cathedral, the three virtues are sitting in a semicircle dressed in the appropriate colored robes. And at the foot of each one of them sits a cherubim holding something that symbolizes that particular color. Like for red, it's a heart or something. The color green, and this one just, when I found this, it just gave me goosepimples. The cherubim sitting at the foot of the virtue of hope was holding a golden ship's anchor.
Oh,
a ship's anchor.
Perfect.
For constancy. Yeah. Yeah. And I went, wow.
Well, Joe, may I speak, ask a question?
Yeah, please do.
I just want to wax rhapsody on how immensely talented you are. I think it's from an intuitive type of grasp. Not every author has it. I mean, I've read plenty of books where it seems to me that there's an effort involved, but yours was a very fluid, atmospheric, fluid novel. And I loved all the detail in it about, just the marina and a mariner's life. And I love the voice of Jack Merkel. I mean, and you remind me of the author Robert James Waller, who wrote The Bridges of Madison County.
Oh, yeah.
Because it ended up, there was almost a nostalgic feel throughout it, that there was a certain type of longing to it. I mean, you just have so much going on that I can't compliment you enough. And when you're saying, well, you think the novel you're reading now, it's probably better. Well, of course it is, because I think everything that you're going to be doing, you're going to be finding, the growth process of how you can get, deeper into what it is that you're bringing to the table, so, but for you to come out swinging like this and do it this well, it's a wonderful story. And I thought the pacing of it was so perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought there were a couple of missteps. I mean, there were a couple of things if I had to do over, I'd probably do a little differently. I think there's one chapter in particular. I mean, I'm not going to get into that one, but I think there was part of one chapter where it sort of lost its rhythm for a few pages. But then I've asked other people about it and they would say, well, no, I didn't get that.
We're our own worst critics. You know that, don't you?
Yeah, I know.
Really hard. And I think you need to focus on what's coming ahead, because just like they used to in publishing, publishers invested in the body of an author's work. And I think that's so important that, I wish it would go back that way, because that's what happened with Pat Conroy. Because if you read The Boo compared to The Death of Santini,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the difference between, and I enjoyed The Boo. Pat never wanted me to read it, but I did get a copy.
I did.
I did.
It was the breathless teenage boy's worship of a father figure.
Well, but how he, the progression of his writing,
Yeah.
was, I think, is as important as.
But you could see what was coming with him. I mean, even reading that, you would catch glimmers of, wow, there's something really good here.
Some of his lines would just take my breath away. I'd have to just stop and just reflect, on some things. So
I mean, the Prince of
we hope
Tides,
all books will do,
and the Prince of Tides is his masterpiece. There's no question about it. But you know what? I think beach music is his opus. As much as I like the Prince of Tides, I think I've read beach music now like 4 times, and I fall in love with it every time I read it. That is such an expansive story that he did such a great job.
I remember I got the manuscript of it. Marley sent me the manuscript of it, and I got to a certain part and there were like 60 pages missing. It's like, oh, no. But I remember there was a scene in it. I was just confused. And I was talking to Marley about it, and then I eventually talked to Pat about it. I said, I don't understand this thing with the stingray at all. It doesn't make any sense to me, because I don't see, there was that horrible scene with him and his friend in the boat. And he said, oh, that's so funny you would mention that, because when I wrote it, it was a shark.
A shark.
Why didn't you leave it a shark? And they said, it's been done to death. And I go, no. It would have made more sense if it had been a shark than a stingray. But that was so funny. But his editor made him change it to a stingray.
Well, I mean, I've known a couple of people over the years that have gotten stupid and either tried to spear or catch a really big stingray. I caught one time that weighed about 25 pounds right out here on the beach. And that son of a gun walked me down about a quarter of a mile of the beach before he even started to tire out. I was out on the beach wrestling with that thing for probably nearly an hour. I had no idea what I had. And then at some point I thought, this has got to be a big stingray. And he was as big as Harley. But so when I read that, and you know, where his friend had just speared the thing, when it said what he did, I thought, oh, you idiot, you just really screwed up here.
It was pretty bad. So,
but Jack Merkel, I gave myself the father I wish I'd had when I wrote Jack Merkel's part. That was the dad I wished that I had had.
Yeah, that's what Cassandra King writes. She said, I write for the story that I want to have happen.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that's an interesting thing too.
People say, oh, are you Jack Merkel? And I said, no, other than a slight physical resemblance, no. My character is more Doug. I was the kid in trouble. You know, I was the one on the verge of spending a little time in the county jail when it was suggested that I join the military. So no, but I worked a lot with kids at risk over, you know, thank God I had a lot of good stuff I was able to draw from too. I mean, I had a career as a newspaper reporter where I learned how to investigate things. So it got me a job with the State Public Defender's Office, and I actually had my own private agency a while. And when I was doing that, I got recruited by the feds. And so I learned a lot about how courtrooms work and the things that go on in courtrooms, and, you know, at-risk kids and damaged families and the violence that takes place in these families and stuff. There's a couple of, you know, where Judge Kicklighter, you know, some of his very stern comments, cry me a river. I knew a federal judge that would tell every single defendant that. They would get to the end of their little spiel and he would just look at him and say, well, cry me a river. And there was one that said the client, it was one of these frequently appearing ones that was always long-winded, and the judge finally had just had enough and said, well, cry me a river. And he said, but Judge, I want a fair trial. I demand a fair trial. And the judge looked at him and pushed his glasses down on his nose and says, well, kiddo, you're going to get your fair trial, and you're going to get your fair trial fairly soon. And when that jury convicts you in fairly short order, I intend to hand you a fairly substantial prison visit. Is that fair enough to you? And everybody in the courtroom just lost it. And I labored over whether or not to use that, but the judge has been dead for years now. So I'll put that into the story.
Well, that's where it helps to pay to be a really good eavesdropper, because I am the same way. Go ahead, Eileen.
Eileen?
So I just wanted to say I had to come tonight. I wanted to just say hi. I haven't not read your book yet, but I do intend to. I had such a wonderful trip. I immersed myself in the South about a week ago. And so I was in the Main Street Reads and in the bookstore. And that's what I took a picture of the shelf that has the Pulpwood Queen books. Your book was there. Mandy's book was there. Claire, I'm not sure that yours must have been there. It's probably all sold out.
Or sold out, yeah.
They were sold out.
Oh,
So, but she was gracious enough to let me have a little time with my book, and some people actually came to talk to me. So that was nice. Then I went to see the Pat Conroy Literary Center. I got a tour. So I figured like I'll just round out my Southern trip and come and hear these wonderful Southern voices, yours and Mandy's and Claire's, and Kathy. You know, it's just, it's been such a nice chance to, I loved the stories you told today, Joe, on about the man that locked the dogs in the car, or the dogs that locked themselves in the car.
The man whose dogs locked him out of the car.
That's it. That was it.
You know, I'm still wondering if that wasn't a little sketchy, but
Yeah, it
you know,
probably was.
weird things happen here.
Happened to me. It's happened to me. I always, yeah, because I'll leave the car running with the air if the dogs are with me all the time.
Yeah.
And so if I run in, I have an extra key.
Mhm.
So I'll leave the car running, lock it. Well, I got the groceries. I'm not on the door. Got the groceries, put stuff down. The extra key was in my hand with the bag. I
Mhm.
slid the door shut on the van. Pearl jumped up and boop, locked me out.
Yeah. Yeah. There was
I'm
actually
cracking enough where I could reach my arm in, but I'm like, you little turd, like I had a second key and you still locked me out.
that's like in the old days, you carried a coat hanger so you could reach in there and grab the pop-up one, which they don't have anymore. There was actually an accident in a parking lot here about 10 years ago, I guess, where a guy had gotten out of his car. He left the motor running in the air condition because it was in the summer and he didn't want his dog to be. And so he left his collie in the car and the collie got into the front seat and somehow engaged
The gears?
transmission. Yeah. And it went into forward and it rolled. It went across the parking lot and ran into another car. And so
Well, that's what my dad fussed at me. So it's always the parking brakes on, you know?
all these people
So-
would run into the car to see if everybody was okay.
And
And it was a collie sitting in the front seat. But,
Oh my.
but yeah, you know, so I mean, who knows if that guy told me the truth? Who knows if his name was even Marty? I don't know.
Makes a good story though. Jim.
Well, that's it. It's a good story. You've got lots of stories in you, I can tell.
I believed it. I believed every word of it, Joe.
Yeah, you know,
I didn't think for a second it wasn't true.
my mind started playing tricks on me when I came home and I told Pam and I said, shit, I'm sorry. What if his wife's dead body was in that car and he was trying to get away? And oh my God, what if he stole that car? And she's looking at me and she goes, you're thinking too much. And then a friend of
You're a
mine,
writer.
well, Harley
That's
wouldn't let
great.
somebody bad get, but I did tell the guy when he got into the car, he was a little bit leery of Harley. And so he goes, is it all right? Can I get in the car with him? Because he's got his head hanging over. And I said, yeah, you can get in. And just to be on the safe side, he goes, will he bite? And I said, not unless I tell him to, and then he'll take your head off. So then I felt safer, you know, just in case he was a guy.
Ed Ben will not stay up. It's slick or something. But you know, those are all great stories. And I'm telling you, Eileen, you're going to thoroughly enjoy this book.
You
It's,
will.
I hope so. I hope so. And
and
thank
I'm
you
looking
for-
forward to the new one. And
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to what you post tomorrow.
Oh, well, I got to get busy after I get done here. And Claire and Mandy, thank you so much for the reviews. I mean, golly. y'all
My
wrote
pleasure.
The nicest review.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And thank you so much, Claire, for introducing me to Billy O'Callahan. I love the stories in The Boatman.
Yeah. Isn't
And
he
one, I
something?
forget the name of it, where the couple went out onto the little island to have like a little getaway. What is the name of that story? And he ends up breaking his neck, and she's tending to him.
Oh, yeah. Towards the end in the
And I
boatman.
didn't realize he handled that so well because the guy was dead from the get-go. But the way he handled that, you know, it kept leading me to think that he's going to be okay. He's going to be okay, but he was dead.
Yeah, it's his use of language that floors me. And I
Oh,
know
God.
that in Ireland, when they say, instead of this morning or whatever, they say of a morning.
Of a morning.
Yeah, I get up of a morning and have a cup of coffee and, you know, of a Wednesday. It's interesting just the way that they spin their language. And I think you and I spoke about this before. It comes from the translation of the Irish language into English. And because the
Yeah.
Irish language has more connections than English,
Yes.
we would say it's a nice day. and they would say, it's a nice day that's in it. Or
Yeah.
they would say, the sorrow is on me.
The sorrow is on me, yes.
Yeah,
The
instead
drink
of
is
I'm
on
sad, they would say the sorrow, or the sleep is on me.
me.
I'm tired. The sleep is on me.
The drink is
It's
on me.
more romantic.
Yeah, they embody everything personally, and it's and I think the English language has cut out for convenience.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh,
a lot
I
of
think
that.
you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so therefore, that's when you see the really good Irish poets, they're using the language that they speak in naturally, and the whole of Ireland, it's a small island. It
Yeah.
takes 3.5 hours to cross it, and I think
Yeah.
people don't realize that. And so, you know, as a culture, and because they're rather cloistered on top of all of that, that they still hold true in the way that they communicate, and therefore the way that they speak
Mhm.
Well,
with
it's
the
kind of
art
what's,
of the Irish
sorry.
language. Yeah, and that's what they're doing. And then the Southerners, the Southern accent comes from the lilt of the Scotch Irish
Yes, it does.
and the sing-songy, and then phonetically the African Americans and what they brought. And so if you take the patois of the African Americans and you add it with the sing-song of the Scotch Irish, you are given the Southern accent. That's where it came from.
Absolutely. Thank you, because that's part and parcel of all this stuff that, you know, the Southern fiction thing that I've been working on, all this stuff, it just got melded together to become something different. They love Southern fiction in Ireland too. They love it.
And country music.
Country music, oh my God. I heard one of the best country and Western bands I've ever heard in Ireland. It was 4 kids playing on the street corner, and they were playing a Garth Brooks song, and they made it way better than Garth Brooks.
They love
Garth
Steve
Brooks.
They
Earle.
love country music.
I
Yes,
thought
Earle.
Brits in low places.
Oh God. And they always think that if you're a guy and the first time you say a word and they realize you're from the South, the first question is, are you from Texas?
Yeah.
I get that here in Malibu. I do. I get that in Malibu all the time.
Are you from
I don't know why
Texas?
that is. Yeah.
And then, of course, if you say you live in Florida, they ask you if you live near Disney World.
Yeah.
So, because that's where all Irish people who come to the East Coast, they go on holiday. If you go down to Disney World during the months when the Irish people are on holiday and the English people are on holiday, it's like little Ireland. They're Irish. Lord, they're everywhere. And I love their slang. Oh my God, their slang. And Claire, you and I have talked about this. Some of the things that they say, that custom they have, they call slagging, which is really big in Dublin. You know, we used to play a version of that here. Well, you know, your auntie's so ugly, you know, you got to tie pork chop around her neck so the dog will play with her or something like that. But they've elevated it to an art form, and it goes 90 miles an hour, and you've got to be able to keep up, or else you just get left behind. And my buddy Patty, who I hung out with one night when I was in Dublin working on this, took me to an Irish pub that was all Irish people, and we sat at a table, and as soon as we sat down, the patois started behind us, and I knew who they were talking about. And so I told Patty, I said, are they making fun of me? And he goes, they're slagging you. And I said, well, what does that mean? So he explained it, and it's basically just a bunch of high-speed, good-natured taunts. But you got to keep it going, and you got to keep it going, and you got to keep it going. And so he coached me on one particular thing to say to him, which I'm not going to repeat here.
What?
But he made me.
I know I've already had shit and turd. What else?
Well, I had to tell the guy that was doing all of the talking that he was up the pole with a culture pig farmer. His sister was up the pole with a culture pig farmer, which is your sister's got knocked up by some hayseed out in the country, basically. But I had to say it really, really fast, and I had to practice it about 15 times before I got it right. And so when I finally said it, it was dead silence. And the guy that had been doing most of the slagging at me just stared at me. All of his buddies started laughing, and he turned to Patty and he goes, You've been coaching the Yankee party
Yeah, yeah. Or they're taking the piss.
or taking,
They're taking the piss, or they're taking the Mickey out of you.
or they're taking, or they're getting so drunk they're trolleying. That's the
Yeah.
one that always kills me. They're trolleying. They're being hauled
Yeah, and-
out on a gurney,
And when they intentionally set out to get drunk, the Irish, they go on a tear.
going in on a tear.
They're on the tear.
And if you
That's
ask
what my uncles used to do. That's what they.
I can always tell. I can always tell where people are originally from by the cuss words they use.
the cuss words, yeah. Well, in Ireland, they make whole sentences out of the F word. So, whole
They do.
sentences with nothing but the F word, and they're always interesting. If a Dubliner tells you, if you ask a Dubliner to do something and they say, yeah, I will, that means no, I won't, or like hell, I will. So, but yeah, just the idiom, but it's a lot like, and Claire, you know, if you get down around County Kerry, it's
Yeah.
almost a Southern accent there. It's like listening to people from the deep South in a rural area talk.
Yeah, I can't understand I can't understand. It takes a lot of effort that the Northern Irish accent, like in Derry or Larne or
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
Belfast and all that, it's so guttural and so flat, and it's the Irish Texas accent, and that the Texas accent is in the back of the throat. It's guttural. The
Mhm.
Delta accent it rolls and it's sing song and it's fluid. Appalachia is a different accent, but yeah, in Ireland, I think that what you hear in Donegal is entirely different than what you hear in Cork. And then where I was in Connemara, which is untouched. The west coast of Ireland is
It's still the
rural
hill
and
country
untouched.
there.
Yeah, and they have a really interesting accent there. And yeah, I don't know why that is, because it's not that big of an island, but they
No.
certainly have different, you know, phonetically the accents. But yeah, that Northern Irish accent.
Oh, God.
I worked with a guy at the Galway Music Center, and I'm telling you, half the time I had no idea what he was saying. None.
Yeah, I got a buddy here who's from Belfast, and his claim to fame is he got blown out of a pub in an IRA bombing, and he landed on the street
Oh, my
outside with
God.
his Guinness in his hand.
He didn't spill it.
He
He didn't spill it.
He swears he did not spill his Guinness. Now, you know, I'm sure that's a good story, but yeah, he was in a pub that got bombed, and he was blown into the street, and he says he landed on his feet. I mean, he didn't have too many. Well, he's drinking himself to death now, but he was as deaf as a post, and he said that was, of course, from the explosion. That he was never able to hear very much after.
Really? That's terrible.
Yeah, the bomb. He said the bomb went off about 15 feet from where he was sitting.
When was this, Joe? Like what year?
And it would have been, let me see, how long have I known Connor? Early 80s, late 70s. Then in the late 70s. It was in Portadown, I think, where it happened. Was it Derry or Belfast? No, it was Belfast. Yeah. I tell you, you go to Belfast and you start talking to people over there, and you think they're like one pub fight away from the troubles again sometimes. But like you say, it's that accent that
Yeah, they're rough, and then they're streetwise there. And
yeah.
they're wary.
Mhm. Yeah, they like in the rest of Ireland, they're really open. People are really, really open. They're not so much. They have to get a comfort level with you before they really want much to do with you. They're sort of they're pretty clannish. So anyway.
Yeah.
Gosh. Well, man, thank y'all for having me here.
Nice to see you,
Joe.
Joe.
This has been fun. I just found out today or yesterday, I got invited to Litchfield Books up in Pawleys Island.
Movable feast.
I'm so excited. I'm going to be the guest speaker or whatever you call it for their movable feast day on July 20th.
That's great.
Movable feast luncheon. I'm so excited.
How wonderful.
yeah. And she goes, now, you know, there'll be like probably 50 or 60 people there, and you know, your gig is for 2 hours, and you just got to keep talking. And I said, well, babe, that ain't going to be a problem.
Yeah, it's not gonna be a
That's
problem.
not a problem.
And be sure and take plenty of books because they buy.
Well, she told me that either they could order the books through the store, or if I wanted, I could take the books and we do the 60-40 split thing. I don't know. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out what to do, you know, because I like the 60-40 split thing because you put some money in your pocket right away. But if they sell them yourself, you get,
When I was there, I took my own books.
yeah.
Joe, you always have a case or two. You
Yeah.
always take you.
But then I went and did a book signing at Lynchfield too.
Yeah, she told me she said they could do it either way, but she would normally suggest you just bring your own books.
Mhm.
And I said, well, I carry around a couple of cases of books all the time.
Always.
Good, good.
Got a
Make
gig
sure.
Friday afternoon at Elizabeth Point Lodge, Mandy, so I'm going to be over there for a couple hours.
When is that?
Friday afternoon. It was supposed to be last weekend for Concourse, because I was supposed to be the guest speaker at their reception for all the people coming in. But they got the concourse schedule all messed up. And there weren't as many people here this year either.
Well, it's still, you know, it's still a little.
Yeah.
Next year, everything will be.
Yeah, they had to change
Everything will
the
be.
whole schedule around, and it messed up her reception time. And I was committed from 3 to 5, and then she got back to me and said, oh my God, I got to move it. Can you do 5 to 7? And I said, the kids are throwing me a birthday party this afternoon, and I'm not even supposed to know about it. So,
Oh boy.
so they rescheduled it for Friday. So, but I'm
Well,
happy.
be sure and mention your upcoming events on Breathless
Yes.
Bubbles and Books.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
people will know, and we'll share that information. But you guys, we're way over. We're way over.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. so much
Thank
for
you.
listening.
Thank you, Kathy, Mandy, Eileen.
We'll see you the rest
Claire.
of the week on Breathless Bubbles and Books. And as soon as I'm done, this downloads onto my Kathy L. Murphy YouTube channel. And if you subscribe and click the bell icon, it'll send you a notification of when you can share that with everybody, because
Okay.
I want everybody to share it with the world. So I'll be
Okay.
doing that as soon as this is over. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Nice
you.
to see
Oh,
you,
well.
Kathy.
Now I gotta
Good
get
night.
Congratulations, Joe.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Mercy, guys.
Bye, Eileen.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for letting me in, Mandy.
You're welcome.